Get ready for the heart-stopping moment when a seemingly quiet, pregnant farm wife reveals her hidden skill as one of the deadliest sharpshooters on the planet. In this riveting tale, tensions explode when a ruthless gang corners a devoted farmer in his own barn, unaware that his gentle, expectant wife is a seasoned counter-sniper prepared to stand her ground. This is the story that has everyone talking, and you won't want to miss a single beat of the action. Listen to the full narrative to discover how one woman's secret past collides with a small town's fight for survival. Every twist and turn will keep you glued to the edge of your seat, and the surprising outcome will leave you both breathless and inspired. If you enjoy gripping stories like this, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you even more thrilling tales and hidden gems from all around the world. Annalise Huxley was known across distant battlefields by a different name, the Phantom of Helmand. For years, she served as one of the most elite counter-snipers in Afghanistan, credited with over 200 successful operations. Yet in the peaceful setting of Greenhaven, Oregon, few would suspect her of holding such a title. At 29 years old and 8 months pregnant, Annalise appeared to be the gentle wife of a local apple grower. She had settled into a life of relative anonymity with her husband Gabriel on their modest but meticulously maintained farm, Brookside Orchard. Each morning she rose before the sun, her body moving in a fluid rhythm that betrayed an underlying athleticism. While most people saw only a quiet, soon-to-be mother performing routine tasks, her keen eyes were always alert, scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Greenhaven was a pastoral pocket of rolling hills, dotted with tidy farmhouses, grazing animals, and rows of fruit trees. It was here, in this seemingly idyllic environment, that trouble had begun to brew. A group calling itself the Crimson Vultures had been traveling from town to town, intimidating or extorting the local farmers. Their leader, a man named Damian Burke, had made a reputation by crushing small communities underfoot, burning fields, raiding barns, and demanding exorbitant protection fees. With each passing week, the stories of violence crept closer and closer to Brookside Orchard. Many farmers were terrified. Some fled entirely, while others talked in hushed tones about forming a vigilante group to defend themselves. The tension ratcheted higher when rumors spread that the vultures were scoping out properties at dawn, taking note of who owned what equipment and which farms seemed most vulnerable. Nightly newscasts reported barns set on fire or fields ruined by masked intruders. The county sheriff, Benito Delgado, was working overtime, but admitted to being stretched thin. Greenhaven was simply too large, with farms scattered across many back roads, making it nearly impossible to protect everyone at once. Fearing for their livelihood, families began arming themselves with shotguns and rifles handed down across generations. However, the majority had minimal training, and the prospect of organized violence only fanned the flames of anxiety. Annalise watched all of this unfold with a measured calm that Gabriel sometimes found unsettling. He knew his wife's history, though she rarely spoke in detail about her time overseas. He was aware of her lethal skill set. There were nights when she would wake, eyes narrowed and heart pounding, the ghost of conflict flickering in her gaze. But she always seemed to compartmentalize it. Daylight found her kneading dough or tending to goats, as though her sniper's instincts belonged to another life entirely. Gabriel, 3 years her senior, had fallen for her quiet confidence the moment they met at a veterans outreach event. That morning, as Annalise sipped her herbal tea, she listened to the local news describing yet another attack. A dairy farm nearly 30 miles south had been ransacked, the owners forced to sign over large sums of money. The broadcaster's voice shook as he relayed the story, fueling the sense of alarm in the region. Annalise glanced at Gabriel and simply said, "It's getting worse." The calm in her tone contrasted sharply with the grim content of her words. In her mind, she was already running through scenarios, angles of approach, vantage points, lines of sight. Her old habits died hard. By late morning, Martha Wynne, a neighbor who lived a mile down the road, showed up at Brookside Orchard. Martha's cheeks were flushed from walking in the crisp fall air, and her eyes darted around nervously, as though she half expected armed men to jump out from behind a tractor. "Annalise, did you hear what happened to Old Man Larkin's property?" Martha asked, breathless. She let herself into the farmhouse kitchen without waiting for an invitation. which was customary in this friendly farming community. They say the vultures are demanding weekly payments now. Timothy Larkin refused to pay, and they vandalized his trucks, smashed all the windows and slashed the tires. Annalise paused her bread making, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to Martha. "I heard," she replied softly. "Gabriel was in town yesterday. People were talking about it." Almon. Then letting out a measured sigh, she offered Martha a chair at the small wooden table. "Take a seat, Martha. You look like you're about to jump out of your skin." Martha lowered herself into the chair and glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting trouble. "I'm sorry to barge in. I don't know what to do. Roy's worried sick. He barely sleeps, keeps a rifle by the bed, and with our daughter Carla preparing for her softball playoffs, we can't uproot her now. But it feels like every family with a teenage daughter is living in fear. The Crimson Vultures don't just burn barns. They threaten families." Annalise knew exactly what Martha meant. She also recognized the fear in Martha's eyes. Fear for her family, for her home, for the sense of safety that once seemed so fundamental to life in Greenhaven. Placing a gentle hand on her own belly, Annalise recalled how many nights she had stood watch during her tours, her rifle resting against her shoulder while the desert wind howled. She had learned then that real security is fragile, always dependent on vigilance. But in Greenhaven, vigilance felt foreign. The community had grown used to leaving doors unlocked, trusting neighbors to look out for one another, and believing that the big world's dangers wouldn't reach this remote corner of Oregon. "Yes," Annalise finally answered. "I know it's frightening. Gabriel and I have made some preparations of our own." She did not elaborate on the level of those preparations, which ranged from reinforced doors and hidden cameras to more specialized gear she'd stored away in the attic. "But all the same, we can't barricade ourselves in forever. We need to think about how to handle this as a community." Martha nodded vigorously. "That's just it. The others want to hold a meeting. Some folks are too scared to show up, but most want to talk about forming a volunteer watch. This evening, at the old community center by the Grange Hall. Will you two come?" Annalise exchanged a look with Gabriel, who had just appeared in the kitchen doorway. He dried his hands on a towel, having been out in the orchard earlier. "We'll be there," he said. "We'd better start planning together." The volunteer meeting at the community center was packed beyond anyone's expectations. Tractor headlights illuminated the parking lot. Pickup trucks lined the nearby road. Residents of Greenhaven, worried and angry, filled the rickety chairs set up in haphazard rows. Annalise and Gabriel stood near the back, discreetly observing the proceedings. Roy Wynn, Martha's husband, called the meeting to order by tapping the microphone. "Friends and neighbors," Roy began, "these are dark times. We all know about the Crimson Vultures. Damian Burke and his thugs are pushing from farm to farm, and no one seems able to stop them. We've asked Sheriff Delgado for help, and he's done his best, but he doesn't have the manpower to guard every mile of back road." A collective murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. "What do we do? I've heard talk of forming a neighborhood watch, or maybe a full-blown militia." People started shouting over one another. A rotund man in overalls stood up and exclaimed, "I say we fight fire with fire. Grab our shotguns and show 'em what we're made of." Another woman, voice trembling, advocated for moving away altogether. A third person urged everyone to pay the extortion fees to buy time until state troopers could step in. The atmosphere bristled with tension, both fear and an undercurrent of defiance. Annalise maintained her composure. She recognized the anxiety that filled the room. She'd seen it many times in conflict zones overseas. Communities under siege often looked for the simplest, most direct solution. But haste could lead to tragedy if not guided by a clear strategy. She began mentally cataloging the farmland's vantage points, the roads that connected each homestead, and the resources that might be mobilized more intelligently than a wild shootout. Eventually, the microphone made its way to Annalise. Martha gestured for her to speak, having overheard that Annalise had served in the military. Annalise took a small breath, discreetly resting one hand on her belly to steady herself. "I know we're all scared," she began, her voice level. "I also know many of you think the only answers are to run or to pay these criminals. But there is a third path. We can coordinate. We can watch out for each other. We can share information, knowledge of roads, who's spotted suspicious vehicles, times of day they're seen. We can become more vigilant as a group. And if push comes to shove, We can figure out ways to defend ourselves that don't involve rushing headlong into a disaster." A hush fell over the room. Although Annalise's words echoed what some had already suggested, there was a clarity and gravity in her tone that caught everyone's attention. Gabriel, standing behind her, gently nodded. "My wife and I are committed to helping," he added. "We'll do what we can to work with Sheriff Delgado and any neighbors who want to protect Greenhaven. But we have to be smart." After the meeting, a smaller group convened in a side room of the community center. Annalise and Gabriel were among them, along with Roy and Martha Wynne, a few other concerned farmers, and the weary-eyed Sheriff Delgado. Delgado set his hat down and rubbed his temples, clearly worn out. "There's no easy fix," he said. "I can maybe get extra patrols out here, but that's not guaranteed. The county budget is thin, and we're stretched. I've already requested state-level support, but they're telling me it might be weeks, maybe months, before troopers can reinforce us." One of the farmers, a tall woman named Dana, spoke up. "And in the meantime, the Crimson Vultures keep getting closer. We're hearing reports they've been mapping out farmland along Crosswell Creek. That's only 10 miles from here." She ran a hand through her hair. "I don't want to wait until they show up with gasoline and guns." Annalise leaned forward. She felt the child shift in her womb, as though sensing the tension. "We need an organized watch," she said, "but not in the sense of a group of people haphazardly standing around with rifles. We need a system, radios, phones, or even text chains. If the vultures enter someone's property, that person needs to be able to alert everyone else quickly. That way, we can respond together, and maybe even coordinate with the sheriff in real time." Delgado nodded. "That would help, but can you train everyone? I heard you had some experience in the military, but this is quite an undertaking." Gabriel answered for her. "My wife's background is more extensive than you might guess. She trained others in a situational awareness." He avoided mentioning her sniper credentials directly. The fewer people who knew about Annalise's lethal precision, the better. Roy Wynne added, "Some of us fought overseas too, or we served in the National Guard. We can help with the basics." Then he glanced at the sheriff. "But we need your cooperation, Delgado. We can't have you thinking we're forming some illegal paramilitary organization." The sheriff managed a thin smile. "I'm on your side. As long as we keep this lawful, I'll do everything in my power to help. We can't just let these criminals run wild." The meeting concluded with a plan to set up rotating patrols at the roads leading in and out of Greenhaven, starting with those that had seen the most suspicious activity. Roy volunteered for an early morning shift, while Dana agreed to coordinate an evening watch near the creek. Gabriel signed up to cover midday, which left Annalise time to rest while still giving her a chance to oversee the orchard's needs. Everyone parted ways carrying a mixture of hope and apprehension about the road ahead. As she left, Annalise caught Sheriff Delgado's eye. "I'll be in touch," she said. "If I see anything unusual, you'll hear from me right away." Delgado nodded, and in that moment, she sensed in him both relief and unspoken curiosity. Annalise had a feeling this was just the beginning of a much larger confrontation. Over the next few days, Greenhaven's newly formed neighborhood watch took shape. Farmers installed motion-activated lights outside their barns. Rusty old pickup trucks were replaced or repaired, in part to avoid breakdowns that could leave families stranded. Some folks whispered about the real possibility of gunfights in the middle of the night. Others focused on more practical tasks, like adjusting fence lines to funnel potential intruders into well-lit areas. Annalise spent her time quietly advising people on how to reduce vulnerabilities, where to park vehicles, how to secure back entrances, and how to organize equipment so that if someone needed to make a stand, they'd have decent cover. At Brookside Orchard, Gabriel and Annalise set up a discrete camera system that synced directly to a tablet in their kitchen. They used a range of vantage points, hidden cameras overlooking the driveway, the orchard rows, and the old barn. Gabriel also rigged a small alarm sensor on the southern fence line. If a vehicle tried to push through there, it would trigger a silent alert. Annalise, meanwhile, used her knowledge of fieldcraft to designate vantage spots near the orchard's tree line, should the Crimson Vultures ever come calling. The more she prepared, the more she felt herself slipping back into a mission-oriented mindset. Despite the swirling fear in the community, Annalise found calm in the routine of farming. Her pregnancy was advanced, and simple tasks like walking through the orchard, checking on blossoms, or feeding the goats helped her maintain focus. She reminded herself that everything she was doing was to protect the future of her growing family. If the vultures believed she was just another meek farm wife, so be it. That assumption would be her advantage if hostilities escalated. Tension reached a new high when Dana reported seeing unknown vehicles cruising slowly past her property at odd hours. Roy Wynn had a run-in one afternoon near the feed store, where he spotted two men wearing Crimson Vultures emblems. He followed them for a bit, but they noticed him and quickly sped off, leaving Roy unsettled. Sheriff Delgado tried to respond, but the men had vanished by the time his cruiser reached the area. That same day, Annalise received a visit from two older farmers, both stooped with age but sharp-eyed and serious. They'd heard through the grapevine that she knew a thing or two about defense. "We don't want to shoot nobody unless we have to," one of them said, "but we need to know how to shoot straight if it comes down to it." Annalise tried to reassure them. She explained basic gun safety, recommended that they practice at a local range, and even offered to set up a dry-fire drill at Brookside Orchard. The men left with grim determination etched into their weathered faces. As Annalise watched them drive off, she couldn't help reflecting on how war, in all its forms, eventually found its way into even the quietest corners of the world. Early one morning, as the sun began to rise, Annalise caught a glimpse of suspicious activity on the orchard's camera feed. 3 trucks, painted dark with tinted windows, crawled past Brookside's main gate. She tracked them for as long as they remained visible, noting the posture of whoever was inside, a silhouette barely discernible through the tinted glass. Gabriel joined her at the monitor. "That's the 3rd time this week they've driven by," he noted. "I've seen those trucks before. They belong to the Crimson Vultures." Annalise leaned in closer to the screen, her jaw tightening. "They're scoping us out, seeing when we're vulnerable." She typed a quick message to the watch group, alerting them to the suspicious vehicles. Within minutes, Roy replied, confirming that similar trucks had been spotted near the feed store the previous day. Another neighbor chimed in, saying they'd seen one matching the description, turning off the county highway toward a dirt path. The coordinated reaction from the neighborhood watch impressed Annalise. Greenhaven was beginning to function like a well-informed collective, but she also recognized a pattern. The Crimson Vultures were methodically learning the lay of the land. This suggested a more organized approach than just random attacks. They were probing, looking for the best angle of exploitation. Gabriel turned to his wife, concern etched across his brow. "How long do you think we can keep them at bay by just watching? They're eventually going to make a move. Sooner or later, they'll try to corner someone, and it could get violent." Annalise exhaled softly, placing a hand on her belly. The baby responded with a gentle kick. "I know, and when that happens, we need to be more prepared than they are." Later that afternoon, Sheriff Delgado called an impromptu meeting to discuss the influx of suspicious sightings. The small conference room at the sheriff's substation was crowded with a handful of farmers and the watch group leaders. Delgado confirmed that the Crimson Vultures had been linked to a series of home invasions in a neighboring county. "State troopers are looking into it," he said, "but they won't get here in time if something goes down tonight or tomorrow. We're essentially on our own for now." Roy Wynn spoke up, clenching his fists. "We can't just roll over, Sheriff. This is our land, our homes. We're not going to abandon them." Annalise nodded in silent agreement. She asked Delgado for a map of the surrounding areas. Spreading it on the table, she began marking where the vultures had been sighted. She accounted for time of day, direction of travel, and proximity to farmland with irrigation ditches that could be used as hidden approach routes. Everyone watched in fascination as she transformed the map into a tactical overview. "They like to strike at dawn or dusk," Annalise noted, "right when people are transitioning between chores or heading inside for dinner. That's when vigilance lapses." The situation came to a head one clear morning when an urgent message crackled through the watch group's communication channel. Roy Wynn's voice sounded strained and breathless. "They're here. 3 trucks at my place. They've cornered me in the barn. Shots fired." The line cut off abruptly. Annalise's heart hammered. She was at Brookside alone, because Gabriel had gone into town for supplies. Without a second thought, she grabbed her phone, her keys, and a small black case that held a pistol. But as she reached the door, she paused, recalling that she was 8 months pregnant. Charging into a possible shootout was reckless. Still, Roy needed help, and from the sounds of it, the vultures were making their move at last. Within moments, she dialed Delgado and then Gabriel. Delgado answered, confirming that he was dispatching units. But it'll take me at least 15 minutes to get to Roy's farm from here, the sheriff said, voice tense. Hang tight, Annalise. Don't do anything rash. Annalise hung up, frustration threatening to boil over. She understood the sheriff's caution, but her instincts told her that Roy might not have 15 minutes. She took a deep breath, forced herself to remain calm, and then marched to the back of the house. A hidden panel led to a small stash of equipment she'd hoped never to use. Inside were items she had preserved from her time overseas. A high-powered spotting scope, a compact rifle with specialized ammunition, and a ballistic vest modified to accommodate her growing belly. She equipped herself swiftly and efficiently, the old motions coming back with muscle memory. Despite the added weight of pregnancy, she moved with purpose. Clipping a communications earpiece in place, she locked the house and climbed into her old SUV, pushing the speed limit along the back roads. As she neared the Wynn property, she parked far enough away to avoid alerting the intruders, then walked through a wooded patch that provided cover. When she reached a vantage point, the sight that greeted her confirmed her worst fears. Roy's barn doors were blown open. One truck blocked the driveway, while two more were parked at odd angles, men with guns scattered around. She spotted Roy crouched behind a tractor tire, pinned down by sporadic gunfire. The men wore the Crimson Vultures emblem on their jackets, proof enough that this was Burke's crew. Annalise set up her rifle, breathing carefully to steady her elevated heart rate. She had to make every shot count. She couldn't simply open fire in all directions. Roy's life and her unborn child's safety were at stake. Before she could even take aim, she saw one of the intruders stomping toward Roy's hiding spot, brandishing a pistol. Annalise exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and put a bullet cleanly into the ground 2 feet to the man's left, just enough to scare him off. The echo of the warning shot reverberated across the farm, catching everyone off guard. Roy looked up, his eyes darting around in confusion. The armed men spun in the direction of the shot, scanning the tree line and the barn roof, but seeing nothing. Annalise had positioned herself behind a cluster of brush on a small hill. She was practically invisible, aided by a homemade camouflage tarp. She used that moment of surprise to key her earpiece. "Roy, if you can hear me, get low and stay put," she whispered. "Sheriff Delgado is on his way." She hoped Roy could still receive the watch group's signals, though it was uncertain if his phone's battery hadn't died or if it was even in his pocket. One of the intruders, a tall man with a shaved head, barked orders to his comrades. "Find out where that shot came from. Watch the tree line." They fanned out, cautious now, their arrogance shaken by the unexpected presence of a hidden marksman. Annalise recognized the man's body language. He moved like someone who'd had formal training. This wasn't just a ragtag gang. Some of these people had clearly learned to handle firearms with precision. Annalise had to make a quick decision. If she escalated, the situation could turn into a deadly firefight, and she was outnumbered. Yet if she did nothing, Roy would remain pinned down. She scanned the horizon for any sign of Delgado's patrol cars, but the road was empty. She had a few minutes at most before the men spread out enough to close in on Roy. Carefully, she fired another shot, this time striking the side mirror of the truck nearest Roy's position. The glass exploded, sending shards flying and forcing one of the intruders to duck for cover behind the fender. The message was clear. There was a skilled sniper watching. Annalise could sense their mounting confusion. From her vantage, Annalise caught sight of Roy scrambling deeper into the barn. Two intruders followed, weapons raised. She took aim at the ground near their feet, sending up a spray of dust that halted their advance. That was enough to spook them momentarily. Then came an unexpected surge of motion. A younger man with wild eyes and a shotgun advanced on the barn side entrance, evidently deciding that raw aggression might flush out Roy. Inhaling slowly, Annalise aligned her sights on the shotgun. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger, aiming to disarm rather than kill. The bullet ripped through the shotgun's wooden forend, snapping it in half and causing the man to drop the weapon with a startled yell. Who the hell are you?" he shouted, glancing around in panic. Annalise's focus never wavered. She felt her baby shift again, a reminder that she needed to end this swiftly and safely. She had to trust that Delgado would arrive soon to mop up the rest. Suddenly, one of the trucks roared to life. A burly driver slammed on the accelerator, swerving the vehicle toward the barn in an apparent bid to either run Roy over or smash apart his hiding spot. Annalise's heart jerked. If that truck slammed into the barn, Roy could be crushed or forced into the open with no cover at all. She couldn't allow that. Calming her breathing, she adjusted her aim for a moving target. The truck rattled over uneven ground, headlights bouncing. In a single, precise movement honed from years of training, she centered her crosshairs on the truck's front tire and fired. The tire blew out, sending the vehicle lurching uncontrollably. Sparks flew as the rim met the gravel. The driver fought to maintain control, but the truck skidded and slammed sideways into a stack of old metal crates. "That's enough. Get out." "Hands up," Annalise murmured under her breath, though the driver clearly couldn't hear her. Panic was setting in among the intruders. Each move they tried to make was neutralized by pinpoint accuracy from a shooter they couldn't see. They had expected an easy shakedown, only to find themselves in a lethal game of cat and mouse. Meanwhile, Roy took the opportunity to dash toward a safer position. Annalise caught a glimpse of him in her scope. He was limping slightly but seemed otherwise unharmed. He clutched a small revolver, though it looked like he hadn't gotten off more than a shot or two before being pinned down. She let out a slow breath of relief, then surveyed the rest of the property. The orchard's perimeter remained quiet, no sign of reinforcements for the vultures. Then in the distance, she saw the flash of red and blue lights. A moment later, the wail of a siren drifted across the farmland. Sheriff Delgado and his deputies were on approach. The intruders heard it too. Voices rose in alarm, and the man with the shaved head yelled, "We got a bail! Move, move!" Vehicles revved, and two of the trucks sped off, careening down the dirt road as fast as they could. The disabled truck remained, with its driver cursing as he tried to pry the door open. Annalise tracked them through her scope, noting that one of the trucks stopped briefly to pick up the man whose shotgun she'd destroyed. Their retreat was disorganized, and Annalise took satisfaction in knowing they were leaving Roy's property unsuccessful and rattled. By the time Delgado pulled into the driveway, only one suspect was left behind, the driver of the wrecked truck. Deputies rushed in, guns drawn, and forced him to surrender. Annalise stayed hidden, dismantling her rifle and cradling it gently. Adrenaline coursed through her, yet her mind remained focused. She'd shown the Crimson Vultures that Greenhaven wasn't going to be so easy to take, but deep down, she knew the fight was just beginning. Within the hour, Roy Wynn was being checked by paramedics for minor injuries, and the battered driver had been taken into custody. Sheriff Delgado oversaw the scene with a mixture of relief and astonishment, surveying the bullet holes and broken glass scattered around the barn. He couldn't hide his curiosity about how one pregnant woman could have created such chaos for a gang that had terrorized entire counties. Annalise emerged from her concealed vantage, having safely stored her equipment. She walked toward Roy with measured steps, conscious of her condition and the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Several neighbors, alerted by the noise and the watch group's messages, had gathered on the property. Their faces displayed a blend of awe, confusion, and gratitude. "Are you all right?" she asked Roy. He nodded and swallowed hard. "Thanks to you, whoever you are up there in the hill," he replied, still trembling. I thought I was done for." "That's what neighbors are for," Annalise said softly. She glanced at Delgado, who had just finished conferring with his deputies. He approached her with an air of gravity. "We have one of them in custody, a real piece of work named Callum. He won't talk, at least not yet. The rest fled. Roy says he heard them mention their boss, Burke. That ring a bell?" Annalise nodded slowly. "Damien Burke. We've suspected he's the one leading the Crimson Vultures. He's organized, calculating. This won't be the last we see of them?" Delgado sighed, then eyed Annalise's clearly pregnant belly. "Look, I appreciate what you did here, but that was incredibly risky. I just want to make sure you understand the danger you put yourself in." She held his gaze with the calm assurance of someone who had survived far worse. "I do, Sheriff, believe me." She offered no further explanation, and Delgado, perhaps sensing her boundaries, refrained from pressing. Gabriel arrived not long afterward, braking his pickup truck hard near the barn. He sprinted to Annalise, relief etched in every line of his face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, breath ragged. "No, I'm fine," she assured him, letting him hug her gently. "Roy's fine too. We got lucky." Neighbors huddled together, talking in low voices. Some wanted to praise Annalise outright for what she'd done, but an instinctive hush seemed to settle over them. They recognized that her skill went well beyond average marksmanship. A few exchanged concerned glances, wondering exactly who this soon-to-be mother really was. Sheriff Delgado took a final walk around the scene, then turned to the group. "We're posting deputies here tonight to secure the area. Everyone else should head home, lock up, and stay vigilant. This might have been a warning shot on their end, just testing the waters. We need to be ready for more." Annalise nodded, her hand protectively resting on her stomach. As the sun began to set, she felt a mixture of triumph and dread. Yes, they had fended off an attack, this time, but she knew all too well that once a bully has been humiliated, they often come back stronger. And the Crimson Vultures were no mere bullies. They were a well-funded criminal syndicate. The real storm, she suspected, was still brewing on the horizon. In the days following the assault on Roy Wynn's barn, Greenhaven found itself in a tumultuous state of half celebration and half dread. Word of how a pregnant woman had outshot the Crimson Vultures spread like wildfire, though few knew the true extent of Annalise's background. Gossip mingled with speculation, and in coffee shops and feed stores across the region, people debated whether her actions might provoke an even harsher retaliation. Sheriff Delgado quickly ramped up patrols, stationing deputies at strategic intersections. However, the county's resources remained limited, and the farmland's vast expanse made comprehensive coverage almost impossible. The single captured vulture named Callum refused to talk, sneering at the deputies whenever they tried to interrogate him. Meanwhile, sightings of suspicious vehicles near outlying farms continued, though no direct attacks occurred in the immediate aftermath. It was as though the Crimson Vultures were regrouping, biding their time. Among the local farmers, a surge of defiance took root. If Annalise Huxley, heavily pregnant, could hold off a small band of armed criminals, then perhaps they weren't as helpless as they'd imagined. Men and women alike began practicing shooting on weekends at a makeshift firing range set up behind the old Grange Hall. Roy Wynn, now hailed by some as Lucky Roy, insisted that they learn from real experts, referring to Annalise, of course, though she deflected the attention. Despite her reluctance, Annalise agreed to hold a series of training sessions. Gabriel assisted, helping to demonstrate basic safety protocols. She was careful not to reveal her full repertoire of skills. There was no need for the entire town to know she was once a top-tier sniper. Her approach was practical, teaching farmers to handle firearms confidently and maintain a level-headed approach under stress. She spoke of angles of fire, using cover effectively, and the difference between warning shots and lethal force. These ad hoc lessons sparked something deeper. People who had once felt isolated discovered a newfound solidarity. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now exchanged phone numbers and CB radio frequencies. The local feed store owner offered a discount on certain supplies if buyers showed proof they were part of the neighborhood watch. Dana, the tall woman who had been at the earlier meeting, volunteered to coordinate these watch shifts more rigorously. She created color-coded maps, marking high-risk zones and assigning volunteers to patrol. Yet beneath the sense of growing unity, Annalise could not shake a persistent unease. She knew from experience that violent groups like the Crimson Vultures didn't simply slink away after a single setback. She suspected they were testing the community's resolve, adjusting strategies, perhaps even calling for reinforcements from beyond the county line. Whenever she had a free moment, she pored over maps and rechecked the orchard's security measures, reminding herself that she was only weeks away from her due date. Some nights she couldn't sleep. She'd slip out onto the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the moonlit fields for any sign of movement. Memories of Afghanistan drifted through her mind. The desert nights, the crisp stillness before an ambush, the knowledge that being unprepared could prove fatal. That same tension now hung over Greenhaven, albeit cloaked in apple blossoms instead of desert dust. A turning point came when Sheriff Delgado arranged a closed-door meeting at the county seat. He invited the local farmers, a small contingent of community leaders, and, at Annalise's quiet urging, a representative from the state police. They gathered in a drafty auditorium, the overhead lights casting sharp shadows on the worn wooden floor. Posters for local fairs and missing pets clung to bulletin boards in the hallway, a stark contrast to the serious talk of organized crime that would take place inside. Delgado began with a somber announcement. "We've intercepted some communications," he told the assembled group. "Nothing definitive yet, but it looks like Burke is calling in outside help. The Crimson Vultures are bigger than we thought. At least some members have connections to paramilitary groups that operate across state lines. They're not just bullies with guns. They've got resources. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the most gung-ho farmers realized they might be up against more than just a band of ruffians. Dana, flipping through notes on her clipboard, asked, "What sort of resources? Are we talking high-grade weapons?" The state police representative, a stoic woman named Lieutenant Franklin, stepped forward. "Potentially, yes. We don't have evidence they have automatic weaponry yet, but we do know they can source bulletproof vehicles and more advanced firearms. It's plausible they might also have technology like drones for surveillance." An uneasy murmur rippled through the farmers. Drones? The idea of an enemy using high-tech gear to spy on them was surreal, more suited to a spy movie than their humble farmland. Annalise exchanged a knowing glance with Gabriel. She'd seen how advanced technology could upend even well-fortified positions, and Greenhaven was no fortress. Still, the conversation quickly shifted to solutions. Roy Wynn pressed Lieutenant Franklin about possible state intervention. "When can we expect troopers? The Vultures aren't going to wait forever to make their next move." Franklin offered a thin smile. "We're doing what we can. We may be able to station a few troopers here temporarily, but the state has other priorities, and our resources are stretched. We're also coordinating with federal agencies to see if they can provide intel on Burke's background." The remainder of the meeting covered potential strategies, arranging rotating shifts to guard critical points, establishing a more formal communication network, and exploring legal avenues to deter the gang. Annalise quietly recommended improved perimeter lighting and discreet cameras. She found ways to phrase her suggestions so they didn't sound too militaristic, focusing instead on practicality. Before adjournment, Delgado leaned in to speak privately with Annalise. "Look," he said, "the fact is, we might not get reinforcements in time, and if Burke's men come in force, this could become dangerous fast. You showed what you can do at Roy's place, but I don't want you risking your life or that baby's." She gave a grim nod. "I understand, but I can't just stand by and watch them terrorize us." "I get that," Delgado replied, sighing. "Just promise me you'll watch your back. If you have any advanced tactics you're thinking of using, run them by me. I don't need vigilantes out there, but I do need every advantage I can get." Pinomon. Paragraph 3, approximately 500 words. Greenhaven's transformation into a fortified community began in earnest. Under the guidance of farmers with mechanical know-how, old tractors were repaired and modified to serve as barricades on key roads. What started as a neighborly watch was evolving into an organized defense network. People set up motion sensors along fence lines, using repurposed hunting cameras and floodlights that activated the moment something larger than a deer stepped onto private land. Dana and Gabriel spearheaded a communications hub in the back office of a local hardware store, linking together cell phones, CB radios, and even older landlines. They charted a web of contacts that allowed them to share updates almost instantaneously. Suspicious vehicle sightings, break-ins, or even weather-related concerns that could compromise watch routes. The farmers took shifts monitoring these channels, ensuring that someone was always on call. Annalise provided behind-the-scenes counsel on strategic vulnerabilities. She recalled from her military training that controlling access points was key. She advised farmers to leave fewer gates open, to align stacked hay bales in such a way as to impede quick vehicular movement, and to keep lines of sight free from overgrowth. Although she never advertised her full background, word spread that her suggestions were eerily precise. "She sees the land differently," one farmer whispered to another, half in awe, "like she's picturing an invisible battle plan." Yet life had to go on. Families still needed to harvest crops, milk cows, and raise children. The local high school held its fall sports events, albeit with extra caution. Carla Wynn continued her softball practice, but the field was watched by volunteers who carried concealed sidearms just in case. Even in the midst of mounting tension, people tried to preserve the essence of normal life. However, that sense of normalcy was shattered one morning when Dana reported a disturbing incident. A small farm belonging to an elderly couple had been vandalized. The barn doors were splattered with red paint, the Crimson Vulture's signature warning. Nothing was stolen and no one was harmed, but the message was unmistakable. "We're here. We can strike at will. Sheriff Delgado responded immediately, taking statements and collecting evidence. But the psychological damage was done. Fear rippled through the community again, causing some to question whether the newly formed defenses were mere window dressing against a far more sophisticated enemy. Annalise noticed the morale dip, and it worried her. If the vultures could spook the community without even facing retaliation, that meant they were playing a larger game of intimidation. That night, Annalise sat at the kitchen table, studying a map under a single lamp as Gabriel rubbed her shoulders. "They're testing us, searching for weaknesses," she said quietly. "They want us to fold." The baby kicked, almost as if agreeing. Annalise grimaced, then continued. "We have to show them that we're not backing down, no matter what. But we have to do it smartly. If they launch a coordinated assault, we'll be outgunned if we rely on brute force alone." Gabriel nodded, his eyes drifting to a set of carefully sealed boxes in the corner. Boxes that Annalise had brought back from storage. He knew they contained equipment from her military past, gear that went far beyond a typical farmer's arsenal. "You thinking about using those?" he asked, almost timidly. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Only if I have to." That weekend, a storm front rolled in, drenching Greenhaven in cold, relentless rain. The downpour was severe enough to flood some of the smaller creeks, making certain backroads impassable. While it complicated daily farm life, turning fields into muck and halting some harvest activities, it also offered a strange sense of relief. Rain might deter the vultures from launching an all-out raid. During a lull in the rain, Annalise and Gabriel drove around to check on elderly neighbors, ensuring they had enough supplies. They found that many farmers had become more guarded, but also more resilient. Plywood-reinforced old barn doors and newly installed cameras blinked red LED lights from under the eaves. This patchwork defense system wasn't elegant, but it showed that Greenhaven was collectively taking a stand. Midway through their rounds, they stopped by Martha and Roy Wynn's place. Roy was still rattled from the earlier attack, though he tried to put on a brave face. "I'm fine," he insisted, but his hands trembled slightly as he held a cup of coffee. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop." Martha offered Annalise a warm smile, but her eyes were filled with worry. "I keep telling Roy we should send Carla to stay with my sister and Ben, just for a while. But Carla refuses. She wants to finish the softball season." "She's got a good arm from what I've seen," Gabriel offered, trying to lighten the mood. "Would be a shame for her to miss out." Annalise placed a comforting hand on Martha's shoulder. "We'll do everything we can to keep this place safe," she said. "And if you decide it's best for Carla to go, that's okay too. Safety first." As they spoke, Annalise noticed a set of strange tire tracks in the mud outside the Wynn barn. Tracks that were too large for Roy's pickup. She crouched to examine them, her practiced eye measuring the depth and spacing of the treads. They were fresh, likely from an all-terrain vehicle. A few droplets of rain still clung to the edges of the imprint. Roy noticed her and sighed heavily. "We didn't want to make a fuss," he admitted, "but we saw a four-wheeler creeping around a couple of nights ago. Figured it might just be kids messing around." Annalise stood, her expression grim. "The vultures are known to use ATVs for quick scouting. They're testing the perimeter." Gabriel ran a hand through his hair. "We need to figure out a more systematic way to catch them in the act. Something that provides real evidence." "Another upgrade to the watch system," Annalise agreed. "Perhaps integrated motion sensors that send an alert to everyone's phones at once." After a tense goodbye, the couple headed home in a contemplative silence. The vultures' infiltration tactics were evolving, hinting at a larger campaign of psychological warfare. Annalise could almost sense Burke's influence behind it all, orchestrating a slow burn that would culminate in a decisive showdown. She needed to ensure that when the hammer fell, Greenhaven would be ready. A week later, the rumor mill churned with a new piece of alarming news. A pair of heavily armed men had been spotted at a convenience store 2 towns over, flashing money and asking questions about large farms in the area. Although they wore no overt insignia, the store clerk recognized the vulture tattoo on one man's forearm. Word reached Sheriff Delgado, who circulated the description to all neighborhood watch coordinators. Tensions flared even higher. Some families loaded their belongings into trailers, ready to flee if things escalated. Others doubled down, stocking up on ammunition and reinforcing their property lines with barbed wire. Annalise tried to maintain a calm public face, but privately, she worried about the risk of a major confrontation. Greenhaven's do-it-yourself defenses were heartfelt, but might not withstand professionals wielding serious firepower. In an effort to keep morale intact, Annalise and Gabriel organized a community picnic on the orchard grounds. They invited neighbors for a potluck under the apple trees, hoping that sharing a meal might remind everyone of what they were fighting to protect. Tables were adorned with homemade pies, fresh cider, and platters of roast vegetables. Despite the tension, the turnout was good. People laughed, children played tag, and for a few hours it felt like the old Greenhaven. Roy Wynn showed up on crutches, a souvenir from twisting his ankle during the barn shootout. He took a seat next to Gabriel, shaking his head at the scene. Hard to believe we're at war, in a sense, and still able to gather like this. Yeah, sure, Gabriel nodded, passing him a slice of apple pie. Precisely why we do it. If we forget to enjoy moments like these, then the vultures have already won. Annalise circulated among the tables, subtly taking note of any newcomers or suspicious faces. She carried a concealed sidearm under her light jacket, just in case. As she refilled coffee cups and offered slices of pie, she listened to the hushed talk. Someone had spotted a black SUV parked near a grain silo that morning. Another had found a fence cut neatly in 2 spots. Everyone shared these stories like war reports, underscoring that this was more than a community picnic. It was a council of mutual defense. Toward the end of the afternoon, Sheriff Delgado arrived, still in uniform. He pulled Annalise aside to share grim news. The state troopers had found 2 abandoned SUVs on a back road. The vehicles had fake license plates and ballistic vests inside, but no occupants. It looked like whoever owned them had fled on foot or transferred to another vehicle. "They're moving pieces into place," Delgado said quietly, scanning the orchard. "Annalise, I can't stress enough how dangerous these people might be. We suspect ties to paramilitary backgrounds, not just street thugs." She nodded, feeling the baby shift inside her. "I'm ready," she replied, voice steady. "We'll keep building up our defenses, and if they come for us, we won't make it easy." Delgado nodded, but Annalise saw the worry etched on his face. As the sun set and the picnic concluded, she couldn't help but sense that a larger confrontation loomed on the horizon, a storm far more dangerous than any they'd weathered so far. Sure enough, the confrontation escalated one chilly November evening. The temperature had dropped sharply, and frost lined the edges of the creek near Brookside Orchard. Around midnight, Annalise was awakened by the soft beeping of her phone's emergency alert. A sensor near the orchard's eastern fence line had tripped. She jolted upright, heart pounding. Gabriel also stirred. In less than a minute, Annalise was dressed, her hair tied back, and her specialized rifle in hand. She crept out onto the porch, scanning the dark rows of apple trees, each faintly outlined by the moonlight. The orchard was silent, but her phone showed motion detection timestamps, indicating someone, or something, had definitely moved past the sensors. She flicked through the camera feeds on her tablet, frustration mounting when she saw only blurred shapes. Then she caught a brief glimpse of a figure ducking behind a tractor. Gabriel, armed with a shotgun, joined her. "We call Delgado," he whispered, voice tight with adrenaline. Annalise nodded, already dialing. Delgado answered groggily, then snapped to attention. "Stay put if you can," he instructed. "We're on our way, but it'll be at least 15 minutes. 15 minutes. A lot could happen in that time." Annalise quietly circled around to the side of the house, mindful of her footing on the frosty ground. Her breath plumed in the cold air as she advanced. She'd set up vantage points specifically for this possibility, small nooks where she could stay concealed. From one such nook behind a large oak tree, she surveyed the orchard. Her heart thudded when she spotted 2 silhouettes moving between the rows. They were using flashlights with red filters, likely trying to avoid detection. Both wore dark clothing and carried what looked like rifles slung over their shoulders. She zoomed in with the scope, confirming her suspicion. Not local hunters, but intruders. Her mind whirled with possibilities. This could be a scouting mission or an attempt to sabotage the orchard. A voice crackled over the orchard's new communication system. Donna's voice shaky but resolute. "Annalise, we've got multiple pings in the area. Wind farm sensors are lighting up too." Annalise replied in a hushed tone. "Understood. Keep everyone else away. We don't need crossfire." She then aligned her scope on the intruders, her finger resting along the trigger guard. She needed to see more, to identify what exactly they were planning. Suddenly, a truck roared to life near the orchard entrance. Headlights washed over the rows, revealing three more figures. One of them held a small device, perhaps a radio or a detonator of some sort. Annalise's pulse pounded. She couldn't wait any longer. She aimed at the ground near their feet and fired a warning shot. The muzzle flash lit up her position, but it also sent them diving for cover. Chaos erupted as soon as her shot rang out. The intruders scattered, one diving behind a rusted cultivator and another dropping low in a row of apple trees. The truck's engine revved, and the driver reversed abruptly, smashing into a wooden fence post in a clumsy attempt to avoid being an easy target. Through her scope, Annalise could see the driver's eyes wide with shock, clearly unprepared for this level of resistance. Gabriel, still on the porch, positioned himself near the door and kept his shotgun ready. He wasn't about to open fire blindly into the orchard, but he stood guard against anyone who might rush the house. Meanwhile, Annalise shifted positions, crawling to a secondary vantage point behind a bale of hay she'd strategically placed weeks ago. She tried to keep track of the silhouettes. There were at least 5 intruders total, maybe more. With her earpiece, she contacted Dana. "Any other alerts coming in?" Dana's voice crackled back. "Yes, Roy's property. Similar intrusion. They've triggered his motion sensors too. Sheriff Delgado is splitting his deputies between you and Roy." Annalise clenched her jaw. This was a coordinated attack on multiple fronts, designed to divide the community's resources. The vultures were no longer just probing. They were mounting a well-planned offensive. Her earlier training sessions with the farmers had given them basic skills, but she feared that might not be enough. She returned her attention to the orchard. One of the men was edging along a row of trees, likely hoping to flank her. She fired a precision shot into the trunk beside him, sending bark flying. He ducked away with a curse. Another tried to return fire, a muzzle flash lighting up the darkness. The bullet thudded into the ground a few yards from Annalise. She inhaled, steadied her rifle, and returned a shot that clipped the edge of the intruder's weapon, knocking it from his grip. It skittered across the damp soil. Inside the house, the lights were off to avoid making Gabriel an easy target. Annalise exhaled slowly, trying to maintain control despite the swirl of adrenaline. She was keenly aware of her pregnant body, how each movement felt heavier, how the recoil from each shot jolted not just her, but the child within. Yet she had no choice. This was the moment she'd been bracing for. Headlights from an approaching vehicle swept across the orchard. Sheriff Delgado's cruiser skidded to a stop on the gravel road. Deputies leapt out, taking cover behind the car doors, shining flashlights into the field. A voice on a megaphone boomed, "This is the sheriff's department. Lay down your weapons and come out with your hands in the air." The orchard lit up with a flurry of gunfire, sporadic but intense. Annalise pressed herself against the bale of hay, returning carefully aimed shots to keep the intruders pinned down. A primal fury flared in her chest, not just for herself, but for every farmer in Greenhaven. She refused to let them rip apart the home she and Gabriel were building. The standoff continued, punctuated by the glare of muzzle flashes and the constant wail of sirens in the distance. Annalise heard Delgado rallying his deputies, urging caution. She glimpsed 2 of them advancing along the fence line, each crouched low behind ballistic shields. It struck her that while Delgado's men were brave, they lacked the sheer manpower to arrest so many armed intruders scattered around multiple properties. Some of the intruders attempted to slip away, but a second patrol car swung around the far side of the orchard, blocking their exit. The orchard's newly installed floodlights suddenly blazed to life, triggered by an alert from Gabriel's phone. Bright beams illuminated the rows of trees, erasing the darkness that had provided the intruders some cover. Annalise took advantage of the light, identifying a figure trying to set something on the ground, likely an improvised explosive or incendiary device. Her stomach lurched at the thought of the orchard going up in flames. She squeezed the trigger, aiming deliberately at his wrist. He yelped in pain and dropped the device, which rolled away harmlessly. Meanwhile, Gabriel shouted from the porch, "Annalise, they're fleeing toward the creek." She pivoted her scope, spotting 3 men sprinting across a narrow footbridge. She fired a shot at the bridge rail, splintering the wood in a shower of splinters. It didn't stop them entirely, but it forced them to scatter, buying precious seconds for the deputies who were now in pursuit. The orchard was turning into a chaotic battleground. Over the orchard comm channel, Dana's voice broke in, breathless. Roy says he's holding them off at his place, but he's pinned down near his barn again. He's got no deputy support yet. Annalise felt torn. She wanted to help Roy, but she couldn't leave Brookside unprotected. A wave of relief washed over her as she heard Delgado on the radio ordering a second wave of backup to Roy's location. If they could just hold out here, maybe Roy could hold out there. Suddenly, an engine rumbled to life among the trees, a hidden ATV the intruders had stashed. One intruder managed to mount it and accelerate toward the orchard's rear exit, headlights bouncing wildly. Two more men darted to either side, presumably trying to protect his escape. Annalise quickly reassessed her position. If that ATV had intel or was carrying ringleaders, letting it escape could bring more trouble later. She set her sights on the ATV's rear tire, waited for a clear shot amid the swirling floodlights, and fired. The tire exploded in a spray of rubber, causing the vehicle to fishtail and crash into a low ditch. The rider flew off, landing hard. Before he could regain his senses, a deputy sprinted over with a weapon drawn. With that, the orchard battle was all but decided. An intense 20 minutes later, the orchard lay strewn with signs of a fierce confrontation. Broken branches, scattered shell casings, and battered farm equipment testified to the chaos that had unfolded. Delgado's deputies managed to apprehend 3 intruders on site, plus the injured one who crashed the ATV. 2 more had surrendered near the orchard entrance, dropping their weapons when they found themselves outflanked by multiple flashlights and drawn pistols. A handful escaped into the night, but not before losing the advantage they'd hoped to exploit. Annalise finally stood, legs quivering. She felt a swirl of emotions: relief, lingering adrenaline, and a pang of worry for Roy's situation. She scanned the orchard one last time through her scope, verifying no stragglers were lying in ambush. Only then did she lower her rifle. Gabriel hurried to her side. "You okay?" he asked, voice taut. She nodded, swallowing to ease her dry throat. "Fine, I think. Where's Delgado?" The sheriff emerged from behind his cruiser, radio in hand. "We've got them in custody," he announced to no one in particular, then stopped in front of Annalise. His gaze swept over her rifle, the sweat on her brow, her protruding belly. His expression revealed a mixture of awe and concern, as if he was seeing her truly for the first time. "I've seen my share of firefights," Delgado said slowly, "but I've never seen anything like this on a farm, or from someone in your condition." Annalise met his gaze levelly. "I did what I had to do," she said, her voice taut. "Any word on Roy?" At that moment, Dana's voice crackled over the comms. "Roy's safe for now. Deputies arrived just in time. They exchanged fire, but the intruders retreated. No casualties on our side." A collective exhale of relief spread through those present. Yet the victory felt tempered by the knowledge that not all the intruders had been captured. Burke's operation was clearly bigger than they'd imagined, capable of orchestrating a simultaneous attack across multiple properties. Even though Greenhaven had withstood this assault, the threat was far from over. While the deputies secured the orchard and cuffed the captured men, Annalise and Gabriel stepped into their home. She collapsed onto a chair, the rifle clattering gently to the floor. Her shoulders trembled. The baby moved restlessly. Gabriel got her a glass of water, and she sipped it with shaky hands. "What if they come back?" Gabriel asked, voice quivering. "They will," she answered flatly. "We took some of them out, but they'll regroup. They always do. This was a test of our defenses, and we made a statement. But they might double their numbers next time." They sat in tense silence, listening to the muffled voices of the deputies outside. At last, Gabriel broke the stillness. "I'm proud of you. You saved us again. Saved the orchard. Saved Roy. But Annalise," he hesitated, placing a hand gently on her belly. "How long can we keep doing this?" She looked down at her pregnant form and closed her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. "But as long as they threaten what we hold dear, I'll fight back. We all will." Over the next several days, local media pounced on the story of Greenhaven's nighttime skirmish. Headlines ran wild with phrases like, "Pregnant sniper defends orchard," making Annalise an unwitting folk hero. Television crews arrived, eager to interview townspeople, but most residents were too shaken to offer sensational quotes. Gabriel stood resolute, deflecting prying questions. Sheriff Delgado refused to confirm the extent of Annalise's involvement, though rumor had it that official records listed her as a concerned citizen who assisted in self-defense. The men captured at the orchard were transferred to a higher security facility. Delgado, in coordination with Lieutenant Franklin, interrogated them over several days. Piecing together scraps of information, they learned that Burke had indeed called for help from a shadowy network with possible paramilitary ties. Though the detainees refused to name names, they let slip that the Crimson Vulture's next move would be even bigger, something designed to wipe out resistance in one fell swoop. Strangely, this looming threat galvanized Greenhaven rather than paralyzing it. The orchard shootout served as a proof of concept that the farmers' defenses could work. More volunteers stepped up to patrol, more sensors were installed, and the communication hub expanded its coverage. Gabriel and Dana hosted workshops on first aid, making sure that if another large-scale conflict erupted, the community would be better prepared to handle injuries. Annalise observed all this activity with a guarded optimism. She took comfort in seeing neighbors unite, share resources, and support each other in ways she'd never witnessed before. But she also recognized the signs of a region on the brink of organized combat. The farmers were determined and resourceful, but the Crimson Vultures had deeper pockets, more firepower, and fewer scruples. One morning, Roy Wynn walked over to Brookside Orchard, still limping on his injured ankle. He had with him a binder filled with notes, maps, sensor data, and ideas for expanding the watch system. Over tea, he confessed to Annalise, "I can't sleep at night anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming back." She understood completely. "Nightmares are hard to shake," she said gently, recalling her own sleepless nights after Afghanistan. "But we can channel that fear into preparation. The more ready we are, the more we take away their advantage." Before he left, Roy fixed her with a surprisingly firm stare. "You know, we all respect you a great deal. We wouldn't have gotten this far without your guidance. But," he paused, searching for the right words, "but we worry about you, and Gabriel, and the baby. You've taken on so much," Annalise tried to smile. "I'm tougher than I look, Roy." "I believe you," he said solemnly. "Just remember, it's not all on you. We're in this together." Those words resonated with Annalise. She realized that, yes, the community was in this as one. Yet as she walked Roy to the door and watched him amble down the gravel path, she couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Everything they had done so far might only be a rehearsal for the real battle yet to come. Over the course of the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Greenhaven shifted from tense anticipation to a determined form of resolve. People spoke openly of the threat posed by Burke and his Crimson Vultures, yet there was also a deeper sense of unity blossoming among the farms. Bartering became common again, neighbors trading extra produce, livestock feed, and even labor hours. It was as if the community had collectively decided to stand its ground, both economically and defensively. In quiet collaboration with Sheriff Delgado and Lieutenant Franklin, Annalise worked behind the scenes to analyze every scrap of intelligence gleaned from the captured vultures. She used her past experience to interpret cryptic references to special shipments in heavy gear. One short passage suggested that the vultures intended to target vital infrastructure, like the main power lines feeding Greenhaven and the farmland's critical irrigation channels. Such acts of sabotage could cripple the entire valley, especially with winter approaching. Meanwhile, Annalise's pregnancy moved into its final stretch. Everyday tasks became physically taxing, but she refused to let that hinder her involvement. She and Gabriel installed extra fencing around the orchard, ensuring that if a large force tried to breach the property, they'd be funneled into narrower choke points. She practiced short-range shooting drills with a sidearm modified to accommodate her changing balance. In her mind, the unborn child she carried was a constant reminder of why she fought so fiercely. Community drills became a weekly occurrence, with farmers practicing how to respond to alarms and coordinate with deputies. They staged mock scenarios where a single property would radio for help, and volunteers from nearby farms would converge in pickup trucks, simulating a rapid reaction force. The idea was to demonstrate to the Crimson Vultures that any attempt to isolate a single farm would be met with a swift, collective response. Amid these preparations, there were fleeting moments of normalcy. Martha Wynne hosted a weekend craft fair, displaying handmade quilts and preserves, Dana organized a hayride for local kids, complete with hot apple cider. Even Annalise and Gabriel found a few hours to stroll through the orchard, discussing baby names and pondering how life might look once the child arrived. But beneath every pleasant moment lay the question, would Greenhaven make it that far without facing another major assault? No one could say for certain until, late one chilly afternoon, the tension finally snapped. Sheriff Delgado rushed into the newly established command post, an old grain silo retrofitted with radios and monitors. "We've got trouble," he announced, breathless. "A caravan of vehicles spotted heading north from the highway. Reports indicate they're armed, possibly with more advanced gear. We think Burke is with them." In a surge of urgent activity, farmers scrambled to alert each other. Phones rang, CB radios lit up, and text messages flew. Everyone recognized that this wasn't just another probe. It felt like the final showdown. Under a sky thick with the promise of snow, Greenhaven braced for a confrontation that would test every defense they'd meticulously assembled. A bitter wind swept across the fields as the sun dipped behind low-hanging clouds, casting the farms in a silver twilight. Gabriel and Annalise stood in front of Brookside Orchard, surveying their preparations one last time. Rows of hay bales and tractor equipment formed makeshift barriers. Floodlights were rigged to motion sensors, hidden cameras perched at vantage points, feeding live footage to a monitor in the kitchen. Sheriff Delgado's voice crackled over the radio. The caravan split into two groups. One's heading toward Wynn's place. The other is on the old logging road parallel to the creek. Looks like they're intending to encircle the orchard. Annalise lifted the binoculars to her eyes. Through the gathering gloom, she could make out headlights fanning across the distance, each flicker a potential threat. Somewhere out there, Damian Burke was orchestrating the largest assault Greenhaven had ever seen. The stakes were high, not just property and livelihoods, but the safety of families and the unborn child stirring within her. "We hold them off as long as we can," she said to Gabriel, her tone resolute. "Then we coordinate with the neighbors for backup." Gabriel clenched his jaw. "We've done everything possible. Let's hope it's enough." Soon the sound of engines reverberated through the orchard. A line of dark SUVs and pickups advanced along the eastern fence, headlights bouncing off the frost-covered ground. Floodlights triggered automatically, bathing the vehicles in harsh white brilliance. The leading SUV accelerated, attempting to smash through the gate, but found it reinforced with steel beams. The impact crumpled the vehicle's front end, forcing it to swerve and halt. Gunshots crackled in the cold air. Annalise guided Gabriel to cover behind a stack of pallets. She peered through her scope, identifying muzzle flashes from the left flank. Returning precise shots, she aimed low, disabling tires, shattering headlights, and forcing the intruders to abandon their vehicles. While some scurried for new cover, others retaliated with sporadic gunfire, riddling the orchard's wooden fence. A deputy's cruiser roared onto the scene, lights flashing. Deputies took positions behind open car doors, exchanging fire with the vultures. One voice on the radio warned, "They've got heavier weapons than we expected. Automatic rifles, possibly." Annalise's stomach clenched. She glimpsed muzzle flashes that were too rapid to be mere semi-automatic. Amid the chaos, she spotted a tall figure stepping out of a black pickup. Even from a distance, his posture exuded command. "Burke." He barked orders, gesturing with a weapon in hand. The stream of bullets intensified, pinning down the deputies. Annalise swallowed hard, shifting her aim toward Burke, but he moved swiftly behind an armored door, making it impossible to get a clean shot. "Annalise, you might need to bring out the heavier equipment," Gabriel said, voice strained. She nodded, mentally calculating how she could maneuver to the hidden vantage point they'd prepared for such a scenario. A hail of bullets sent splinters flying from a nearby tree, reminding her that time was short. The final battle had truly begun, and if they were to save Greenhaven from the Crimson Vultures, she had to act decisively. Inside Brookside's barn was a concealed loft that Annalise had spent days outfitting. Accessible only by a retractable ladder, hidden behind a stack of feed bags, it provided a near 360-degree view of the orchard through small vents near the roofline. Quietly, she slipped away from Gabriel, who continued firing suppressive shots to keep the intruders at bay. Hauling herself up into the loft took every ounce of effort. Her pregnant belly made the climb awkward, and adrenaline spiked her heart rate. She forced herself to move slowly to avoid making any noise. Once inside, she unlatched the case containing her specialized rifle, one with greater range and stopping power than the standard one she had been using. Carefully, she assembled the weapon, her hands steady despite the pounding of her pulse. Peering through the narrow vent, she saw chaos below. The orchard glowed under floodlights, silhouettes darting between vehicles and makeshift barricades. Deputies fired in short bursts, trying to conserve ammunition, while the crimson vultures pressed forward in waves. The radio squawked updates from Roy's property, where a similar firefight raged. Residents from other farms were en route, forming a ragtag relief force. But the moment Annalise focused her scope, she realized that no scattered group of volunteers could handle what was happening here. The vultures were better armed, more numerous, and using paramilitary tactics. Burke's face flashed into view. He directed his men with hand signals, orchestrating a flanking maneuver. If left unchecked, they would encircle the deputies, forcing a surrender or worse. She inhaled, bracing against a wooden beam. There was no question in her mind that taking out Burke would be the quickest way to shatter the vultures' coordination. But the shot was not a simple one. He moved unpredictably, crouching behind vehicles. Plus, gunfire streaked across the orchard from all angles, complicating her line of sight. She needed him to emerge just a fraction more from cover. Her chance arrived when Burke stepped out to holler at a subordinate. She couldn't hear his words over the din, but his mouth was open in an angry snarl. Annalise centered her crosshairs on the body armor that peeked out from beneath his jacket. If she missed, he'd be alerted to her position immediately, and she'd lose her best shot. Exhaling slowly, she recalled her training. The invisible line between her eye, the scope, and the target became her entire universe. She squeezed the trigger, feeling the recoil slam against her shoulder. Burke staggered, jerking backward with a startled expression. But it wasn't a clean kill. His armor absorbed much of the impact, and he stumbled behind the truck. Still, that shot disrupted his momentum. The vultures hesitated, uncertain about their leader's condition. Deputies seized the opening, lobbing flash bangs that disoriented several intruders. Annalise quickly chambered another round. She knew she had to capitalize on Burke's confusion before he regained command. A deputy's voice crackled urgently over the radio. "We've got multiple tangos pinned down, but they're bringing up some kind of heavy ordnance. A grenade launcher, maybe. We need immediate backup." The statement confirmed Annalise's fear that the vultures had smuggled more advanced gear. If they started lobbing grenades into the orchard, it could be catastrophic. Squinting through her scope, she scanned for the source of the heavy weapon. At last she saw it. A man with a bulkier silhouette crouched behind a fallen oak trunk, fiddling with a large tube-like device. She recognized it immediately as a possible M203 or similar launcher. If that man got off even a single round in the right place, everything the community had built could go up in flames. Her heart thudded. This was high-stakes shooting, a dim target, partially obscured, with friendlies moving all around. She had to wait for the moment his head rose above the trunk. Seconds ticked by, the orchard echoing with gunfire. At last, the man peeked up to align his shot. Annalise didn't hesitate. She fired once, aiming just below the top of the trunk. The bullet struck him in the upper chest, toppling him sideways. The launcher fell from his grasp, inert. Relief surged through her, but it was short-lived. Another figure dashed into view, likely someone else looking to retrieve the launcher. Annalise fired again, hitting close enough to deter him, and he darted back into cover. Focusing back on Burke's position, she saw him being helped by two subordinates, both frantically trying to drag him toward a black SUV. He was walking under his own power but clearly injured, listing to one side. She considered firing again to finish the job, but the angle was terrible. Another round of gunfire from elsewhere forced her to duck momentarily, bullets striking the barn's exterior. Gabriel's voice came faintly through the barn loft's wooden walls, yelling for the intruders to stand down. She risked a quick look out the second vent, noticing that more pickups from neighboring farms were arriving. Reinforcements. They parked in a line behind the deputies, providing covering fire. The orchard was transforming into a full-scale war zone, but the tide seemed to be turning in Greenhaven's favor. Returning her attention to Burke, she saw that he was now in the SUV, engine revving. The vehicle peeled away, heading for the orchard's main exit, which had been partially blocked by a deputy's cruiser. Instead of trying to ram it, The SUV veered to the side, skidding through a ditch and back onto the road. Annalise attempted a shot at the tires, but the angle was too steep. The bullet ricocheted off the pavement. As Burke's vehicle roared into the distance, several of the remaining vultures began to retreat. Realizing their leader was gone, deputies surged forward, disarming those who dropped their weapons and tackling those who resisted. Although the orchard still echoed with scattered pops of gunfire, the bulk of the Crimson Vulture's force was breaking apart, confusion spreading in the ranks. The next hour felt like a surreal blend of military operation and farm cleanup. Deputies and armed neighbors moved methodically through the orchard, securing any remaining threats. Flashlights bobbed among the tree rows, illuminating faces filled with adrenaline and exhaustion. For Annalise, each minute in that loft was a test of will. The vantage point was excellent, but she was acutely aware of her pounding heart and the tightness in her abdomen. She couldn't stay prone forever. Finally, Sheriff Delgado's voice came across the radio. "We've got it under control now. The property is mostly secure. We've taken multiple suspects into custody. Could use a medic or two for the wounded, but it's winding down." Annalise carefully disassembled her rifle, stowing it in the case. She lowered herself down the ladder, each rung a moment of fragile balance. As her boots touched the barn floor, the baby kicked vigorously, perhaps protesting the tension or the cramped position she had maintained for so long. She whispered a calming reassurance, though her own nerves were frayed. Stepping out into the orchard, she found Gabriel leaning against a tractor, talking quietly with Roy Wynn, who had arrived with the backup convoy. Roy's lip was bloodied, and Gabriel had a graze on his arm, but both were upright and alert. They looked at her with wide eyes, relief flooding their expressions. "You did it," Roy said, voice thick with emotion. "You and Gabriel, everyone. We held them off." Annalise managed a small smile. "They'll think twice before coming back." But her satisfaction was muted by the knowledge that Burke had escaped, wounded but alive. She'd hoped to end his grip on the region tonight. Still, capturing a large portion of his crew might be enough to cripple the Crimson Vulture's local operations, at least for a while. As the adrenaline subsided, exhaustion and discomfort rolled over her in waves. Gabriel saw her waver and rushed to support her. "Easy," he murmured, guiding her toward a nearby crate where she could sit. "You need to rest." Sheriff Delgado approached, flanked by two deputies. His uniform was smeared with dirt and ash. "We'll be processing the prisoner," he told them. "I need statements from everyone, including you, Annalise." His gaze lingered on her belly, as if marveling that a woman so near to giving birth could be such a pivotal figure in a firefight. "You'll get my statement," Annalise replied gently, "but not right this minute." Delgado nodded, conceding that she needed a moment. All around, neighbors emerged from behind cover, checking on each other. Some wept in relief. Others expressed quiet victory. A few carried first aid kits, tending to cuts and bruises. The orchard floodlights still blazed, revealing bullet-riddled trucks and torn-up soil. Yet amid the debris, there was a palpable sense of unity, a knowledge that they had stood together against a common threat, and in doing so, they had endured. Despite the major blow dealt to the Crimson Vultures, Greenhaven did not revert to normal life overnight. Burke had escaped, and rumors circulated that he would regroup or possibly shift his operation elsewhere. Nevertheless, the immediate crisis had passed, and the farmers took stock of their ravaged fields and bullet-scarred fences. With the Vultures' local network in disarray, the community could finally breathe a cautious sigh of relief, though no one let down their guard entirely. In the weeks that followed, a steady stream of external support arrived. State troopers finally made an appearance, patrolling the roads and offering to secure key entry points. Volunteers from nearby counties came bearing supplies, lumber for repairing damaged structures, new tarps to replace bullet-riddled barn walls, and medical equipment for the local clinic. Sheriff Delgado oversaw the processing of the captured vultures, many of whom faced serious charges. Interrogations yielded valuable intel that implicated Burke in a string of crimes extending beyond state lines. Lieutenant Franklin worked tirelessly to coordinate with federal agencies. The aim was to ensure that Burke, if apprehended, would not slip through the cracks of a fragmented legal system. Meanwhile, Gabriel insisted Annalise take a step back from active duties. She spent her days recuperating and offering strategic advice rather than patrolling. Brookside Orchard became a hub where townspeople dropped by to exchange information or simply say thank you. Roy Wynn, moving on from his own scrapes and bruises, expanded the watch system to include a rotating schedule for off-site patrols. Even if Burke wasn't likely to return soon, they wanted to remain vigilant. One cold morning, a small group of soldiers from the National Guard arrived unannounced, having heard rumors of advanced weaponry in civilian hands. Though Delgado quickly cleared up any misunderstandings, the soldiers took an interest in Annalise's involvement. She stayed polite but guarded, providing only the basics. She'd long ago learned that attracting too much official notice could complicate her quiet life. Still, word of the pregnant sniper continued to circulate, reaching as far as major news outlets. Some ran heroic features about the stand at Greenhaven, while others questioned the wisdom of civilians taking on heavily armed criminals. Annalise declined all interview requests, wanting no part in sensationalism. She had stepped up to defend her home, nothing more. The real story, she believed, was how the entire community had bonded together. Late at night, with the orchard still under partial watch, Annalise would step onto the porch and feel the baby shift. She found herself talking softly to her unborn child, recounting how neighbors had protected one another. She was determined that her son or daughter would grow up in a place where unity trumped fear, and where an attack on one was an attack on all. Though she sensed there were more trials ahead, for Greenhaven, for herself, for the battered farmland, she held on to hope. The orchard's blossoms would eventually return, just as life had a way of renewing itself even after hardship. With Burke on the run, federal authorities cast a wider net. Reports came in that he had been spotted crossing state lines, possibly seeking to recruit more muscle. Yet as weeks turned into a month without another incursion, Greenhaven's residents dared to embrace a cautious optimism. Harvest season had passed, and winter's chill settled in. The orchard's trees stood leafless under frosty skies, but at least they stood, unburned, unrazed. Sheriff Delgado, still reeling from the sheer scale of the confrontation, took the opportunity to propose new countywide policies. He suggested that every farm register basic defensive equipment to maintain some level of accountability and readiness. No one wanted Greenhaven to become a fortress with barbed wire and guard towers, but neither did they want to be caught off guard again. The farmers, having tasted the reality of an organized criminal threat, largely agreed. During this lull, Annalise finally had a chance to focus on preparing for her child's arrival. Gabriel repainted a small spare room in the farmhouse, turning it into a nursery with a handmade crib, quilts from Martha Wynn, and soft rugs salvaged from rummage sales. Annalise layered the windows with blackout curtains, half out of caution, should future threats arise, and half to help the baby sleep. Occasionally, neighbors would knock on the door with food or baby clothes, a gentle acknowledgement of the debt they felt they owed her. She responded with modest thanks, reiterating that what she'd done was part of a collective defense. But privately, she took heart in the gestures, small tokens that showed Greenhaven was healing. One evening, Roy Wynn dropped by unannounced. Gabriel offered him tea in the living room, while Annalise rested in the rocking chair. Roy spoke hesitantly. "I've been thinking, what happens if Burke never comes back, but someone else tries the same thing? We've proven we can fight, but do we really want to live in a constant state of siege?" Annalise considered his question. "We can't let fear define us," she said. "Defense is necessary, but it shouldn't be our entire identity. We have to rebuild in a way that makes our community stronger, not just armed." Gabriel agreed. "Maybe we can organize the farmland more efficiently. We've already learned how to share resources better. We can create a formal cooperative, a structure that helps us stand together, not just in emergencies, but day to day." Roy tapped his fingers on the table. "A cooperative? That might be exactly what we need. If we streamline how we handle crops, sales, and security, we'll be more resilient if another group tries to threaten us. At the same time, we'll be building on the unity we already have." A spark of inspiration flickered across Annalise's face. Exactly. Turn the adversity we faced into a foundation for something better. In that moment, she realized how far they'd come since the quiet days before the vultures arrived. Greenhaven had tasted war and discovered a wellspring of unity within itself. Now they had a chance to mold that unity into a lasting legacy, one that her child could inherit. Time marched on, And as Christmas lights began to appear on farmhouse porches, Annalise's due date drew ever closer. The orchard, stripped of leaves, now wore a fragile beauty under the low winter sun. Birds nested in the bare branches, and a hush seemed to drape itself over the land, as if nature itself sensed the aftermath of conflict. Sheriff Delgado, forging new alliances with state troopers and federal contacts, took advantage of the quiet to strengthen the county's intelligence network. Tips flowed in from other regions, painting a broader picture of Burke's empire of intimidation. In a stroke of good fortune, some of Burke's former associates turned informants after seeing how decisively Greenhaven had fought back. One crisp morning, a package arrived for Annalise, delivered by a federal courier who gave no return address. Inside was a folder containing photos of known Crimson Vulture hideouts, along with one note: "He's wounded and on the run. Keep your guard up." No signature, no explanation. Annalise wondered which of her old contacts might have sent it. Clearly, her reputation extended beyond local farmland. She shared the contents with Delgado in private. Studying the photographs, he frowned at images of abandoned warehouses and backroad motels. "He could resurface anywhere," Delgado said, tapping a shot of a ramshackle building. "But maybe he's out of commission long enough for us to get stronger." "Let's not rely on maybe," Annalise countered. She recommended continuing the watch system, albeit with fewer hours now that winter chores demanded everyone's attention. Delgado agreed, implementing a scaled-back rotation that still kept an eye on key roads. Greenhaven had no illusions that it was invincible. Rather, the townsfolk carried a subdued but collective determination. They had faced the worst once, and they had survived. Some families still bore scars, barns riddled with bullet holes, livestock lost, a few injuries requiring ongoing care. Yet the shared hardship had bonded them in a way no one could have predicted. Annalise's baby shower was a testament to that bond. Organized by Martha Wynne and Dana, it was less about frilly decorations and more about celebrating the resilience of life amid struggle. The entire town pitched in: crocheted blankets, handmade rocking horses, jars of local honey labeled with messages of support. Roy Wynne gave a short speech, tears glimmering in his eyes as he thanked Annalise for saving him that day in the barn. "Your courage," he said, "is second only to your generosity." She accepted the gifts and kind words with humble gratitude. Yet her eyes often drifted to the door or the windows, her soldier's instincts ever alert. Even in the midst of celebration, she couldn't entirely shake the vigilance that had kept them alive. She suspected it would linger long after her child was born. That night, Gabriel found her sitting in the nursery, gently running her hand over the crib. "You're still on edge," he observed. She nodded. "I can't help it. But we're going to raise this child right, Gabriel, in a place where neighbors watch out for each other, not because they have to, but because they want to." That's Greenhaven's real strength. As January arrived and unexpected snow blanketed Greenhaven, turning the orchard into a scene worthy of a postcard. The hush of fresh snow muffled the everyday sounds of tractors and livestock. It also offered a form of natural security. Tracks would be easy to spot if anyone tried to creep onto the property. Despite the cold, folks felt an inner warmth, buoyed by the knowledge that their collective vigilance continued to hold firm. For Annalise and Gabriel, the final days of pregnancy were a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The local clinic, bolstered by donations and new equipment after the confrontation, stood ready to assist. Neighbors made contingency plans. If roads were blocked by snow or another emergency cropped up, they'd take Annalise to the hospital in a convoy if necessary. She had never felt more supported, yet she also yearned for a time when she could simply be a mother without scanning every horizon for threats. Then one afternoon, a coded message arrived on the orchard's communication line, something only Annalise recognized. It referenced an old military call sign she had used years ago. Heart racing, she decoded the text, which read, "Burke captured out of state, gravely injured. Confirm details, stay vigilant. Nakronawern." The origin was untraceable, likely from the same source who'd sent the package of photos. She shared the news discreetly with Sheriff Delgado and Gabrielle. Delgado immediately got on the phone with his federal contacts. "Yes, we've heard a rumor, nothing official, possibly picked up during a raid in Montana," one agent reported. With each passing hour, new details trickled in. Eventually, Delgado confirmed it. Burke had been apprehended by a multi-state task force. He was in custody, awaiting extradition. The community's reaction was a complex blend of relief and careful optimism. Some farmers cheered, feeling that a dark cloud had finally lifted. Others warned that even without Burke, splinter groups might remain. Annalise found herself in a rare moment of peaceful acceptance. While threats could arise anywhere, the immediate danger that had loomed over Greenhaven for months now appeared to have passed. The next day, an impromptu celebration broke out at Roy Wynn's place. Neighbors brought food, music played, and for once, talk of watch rotations and weapon caches receded into the background. People hugged each other, danced awkwardly in the snow, and joked about how they'd labeled jam jars with the date of Burke's capture. Annalise remained subdued, though. She knew that real healing took more than just removing one villain. It required time and trust and the willingness to believe in a safer tomorrow. But as she stood by Gabriel, sipping hot cider and watching children fling snowballs, she felt a stirring of genuine hope. Maybe, just maybe, Greenhaven had emerged stronger, ready to forge a new chapter built on the unity it had discovered. That night back at the orchard, she placed a hand on her belly, feeling a contraction. It was mild but insistent. The baby was coming soon, and something inside her whispered that this new life would symbolize the beginning of a more hopeful era. 3 days later, in the quiet pre-dawn, Annalise went into labor. Snow dusted the roads, but a plow had recently cleared the main route. Gabriel helped her into their pickup, while Martha, Wynn, and Dana followed behind in another car for added support. They made it to the county hospital without incident, where a small team of nurses and doctors, most of whom Annalise knew by first name, welcomed her. Labor was intense and lasted through midday. Gabriel stayed by her side, wiping her brow and offering encouragement. She breathed through the pain, drawing on the same discipline and focus that had guided her through countless perilous moments. Yet this trial was unlike any she had ever faced. When their child finally arrived, a healthy baby girl, Annalise felt her entire body flood with relief and astonishment. She cradled the infant in her arms, marveling at the delicate fingers, the tiny, squinting eyes. "I can't believe she's really here," Gabriel murmured, tears glistening in his eyes. "She's perfect." Annalise responded with a radiant, exhausted smile. In that moment, the orchard battles, the paramilitary raids, and the fear of armed men felt distant. What mattered was this fragile, new life, testament to resilience and hope. Greenhaven rejoiced. News spread quickly through the Watch Network, now repurposed to share celebratory tidings. Martha and Roy Wynn showed up with flowers and warm blankets. Sheriff Delgado swung by to congratulate them, tipping his hat as he entered the hospital room. Even Lieutenant Franklin sent a card from her station in the next county, acknowledging the remarkable journey Annalise had taken. For a brief time, Annalise allowed herself to forget about rifles and watch rotations. She reveled in the softness of her daughter's cheeks, the gentle way she clenched a tiny fist around her mother's finger. Gabriel made quiet phone calls to family and friends, ensuring everyone who had supported them knew the good news. Upon returning to Brookside Orchard a few days later, the new parents found a small but heartfelt surprise. Their porch was decorated with handmade signs, each expressing love and solidarity. "Welcome home, little one," read one banner, while another declared, "Protected by all of Greenhaven." Tears welled in Annalise's eyes. This was the community they had fought to safeguard, a community that now held their child in its collective embrace. In the weeks that followed, neighbors cycled through with food, diapers, and offers of help. The orchard settled into winter's rest, branches bare and pathways hushed under drifts of snow. Though the bullet holes in some fences remained as silent reminders of the past conflict, the orchard itself looked forward, brimming with the quiet promise of spring blossoms. One cold evening, Annalise stood by the nursery window, her daughter asleep in her arms. She gazed out at the moonlit orchard and reflected on everything that had happened. She thought of Burke's downfall, the unwavering stand of the community, and the new life in her arms. Whispering softly, she promised her child that Greenhaven would remain a place of hope, a place where the strong protect the weak, where neighbors stand shoulder to shoulder, and where even a pregnant woman could prove that true bravery comes in unexpected forms. As the baby stirred gently, Annalise pressed a tender kiss to her brow. She knew there would always be threats in the world, always new challenges. But tonight, love and resilience filled the orchard. forging a sanctuary for all who called it home. And that, she believed, would forever remain Greenhaven's most powerful defense. In the days following the assault on Roy Wynn's barn, Greenhaven found itself in a tumultuous state of half celebration and half dread. Word of how a pregnant woman had outshot the Crimson Vultures spread like wildfire, though few knew the true extent of Annalise's background. Gossip mingled with speculation, and in coffee shops and feed stores across the region, people debated whether her actions might provoke an even harsher retaliation. Sheriff Delgado quickly ramped up patrols, stationing deputies at strategic intersections. However, the county's resources remained limited, and the farmland's vast expanse made comprehensive coverage almost impossible. The single captured vulture named Callum refused to talk, sneering at the deputies whenever they tried to interrogate him. Meanwhile, sightings of suspicious vehicles near outlying farms continued, though no direct attacks occurred in the immediate aftermath. It was as though the Crimson Vultures were regrouping, biding their time. Among the local farmers, a surge of defiance took root. If Annalise Huxley, heavily pregnant, could hold off a small band of armed criminals, then perhaps they weren't as helpless as they'd imagined. Men and women alike began practicing shooting on weekends at a makeshift firing range set up behind the old Grange Hall. Roy Wynn, now hailed by some as Lucky Roy, insisted that they learn from real experts, referring to Annalise, of course, though she deflected the attention. Despite her reluctance, Annalise agreed to hold a series of training sessions. Gabriel assisted, helping to demonstrate basic safety protocols. She was careful not to reveal her full repertoire of skills. There was no need for the entire town to know she was once a top-tier sniper. Her approach was practical, teaching farmers to handle firearms confidently and maintain a level-headed approach under stress. She spoke of angles of fire, using cover effectively, and the difference between warning shots and lethal force. These ad hoc lessons sparked something deeper. People who had once felt isolated discovered a newfound solidarity. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before now exchanged phone numbers and CB radio frequencies. The local feed store owner offered a discount on certain supplies if buyers showed proof they were part of the neighborhood watch. Donna, the tall woman who had been at the earlier meeting, volunteered to coordinate these watch shifts more rigorously. She created color-coded maps, marking high-risk zones and assigning volunteers to patrol. Yet beneath the sense of growing unity, Annalise could not shake a persistent unease. She knew from experience that violent groups like the Crimson Vultures didn't simply slink away after a single setback. She suspected they were testing the community's resolve, adjusting strategies, perhaps even calling for reinforcements from beyond the county line. Whenever she had a free moment, she pored over maps and rechecked the orchard's security measures, reminding herself that she was only weeks away from her due date. Some nights she couldn't sleep. She'd slip out onto the porch, rifle in hand, scanning the moonlit fields for any sign of movement. Memories of Afghanistan drifted through her mind. The desert nights, the crisp stillness before an ambush, the knowledge that being unprepared could prove fatal. That same tension now hung over Greenhaven, albeit cloaked in apple blossoms instead of desert dust. A turning point came when Sheriff Delgado arranged a closed-door meeting at the county seat. He invited the local farmers, a small contingent of community leaders, and, at Annalise's quiet urging, a representative from the state police. They gathered in a drafty auditorium, the overhead lights casting sharp shadows on the worn wooden floor. Posters for local fairs and missing pets clung to bulletin boards in the hallway, a stark contrast to the serious talk of organized crime that would take place inside. Delgado began with a somber announcement. "We've intercepted some communications," he told the assembled group. "Nothing definitive yet, but it looks like Burke is calling in outside help. The Crimson Vultures are bigger than we thought. At least some members have connections to paramilitary groups that operate across state lines. They're not just bullies with guns. They've got resources." A hush fell over the crowd. Even the most gung-ho farmers realized they might be up against more than just a band of ruffians. Dana, flipping through notes on her clipboard, asked, "What sort of resources? Are we talking high-grade weapons?" The state police representative, a stoic woman named Lieutenant Franklin, stepped forward. "Potentially, yes. We don't have evidence they have automatic weaponry yet, but we do know they can source bulletproof vehicles and more advanced firearms. It's plausible they might also have technology like drones for surveillance." An uneasy murmur rippled through the farmers. Drones. The idea of an enemy using high-tech gear to spy on them was surreal, more suited to a spy movie than their humble farmland. Annalise exchanged a knowing glance with Gabriel. She'd seen how advanced technology could upend even well-fortified positions, and Greenhaven was no fortress. Still, the conversation quickly shifted to solutions. Roy Wynn pressed Lieutenant Franklin about possible state intervention. When can we expect troopers? The vultures aren't going to wait forever to make their next move. Franklin offered a thin smile. We're doing what we can. We may be able to station a few troopers here temporarily, but the state has other priorities and our resources are stretched. We're also coordinating with federal agencies to see if they can provide intel on Burke's background. The remainder of the meeting covered potential strategies, arranging rotating shifts to guard critical points, establishing a more formal communication network, and exploring legal avenues to deter the gang. Annalise quietly recommended improved perimeter lighting and discreet cameras. She found ways to phrase her suggestions so they didn't sound too militaristic, focusing instead on practicality. Before adjournment, Delgado leaned in to speak privately with Annalise.